I want to say hello to all of you. Let me just tell you very quickly who I am. I'm a very close and longtime friend and supporter of Rage and Rabbi Katzin. Before COVID, I've been out to speak to you guys a number of times. And the reason that I feel Rage is so very, very important, of course, is because you're the link to keeping Judaism going. You voluntarily participate in the program. You wouldn't do so if you didn't care. So I'm just going to speak very, very briefly for hopefully at the most for 10 minutes. And I want to tell you where I'm going in this little talk. So I'm going to give you the summary at the end. And basically where I'm going is that I want to encourage all of you to host a Seder, to have a Seder. Now, I can see you all, presumably you can see me. Just if you'd show your hands at the moment, how many of you think that you're going to have some kind of family Seder this year for Pesach? Okay, so that's a little more than half. So I want to very much encourage you to do this. And let me say a few things about why I feel it's important. Just one more show of hands. It's not first grade. But how many of you are involved in your work in technology in some way or another, in tech? Okay. So I want to talk for a moment about the differences between technology and tradition. And this relates, of course, to where I'm going regarding celebrating Pesach. So I observed technology. Technology, to be honest, was almost non-existent when I was your age. But I'd like to make 3 points first about technology, if I may. The first thing is that technology, for the most part, is very isolating. You may be programming, working with a computer, maybe with one other person, but by and large, if you're in tech, you don't have much human contact. And by the way, of course, none of this is to denigrate tech. You're going to, at 1:30, hear from one of the great tech people of all time. So this is just meant to contrast. It's not to put anything down. But the first thing is technology is isolating. The second thing is that technology is really not what I would call spiritual. And, you know, if we distinguish in our lives about things that come from the brain as opposed to things coming from the heart, you know, I think it's fair to say that technology, for the most part, comes from the brain. There isn't much heart or emotion involved in technology, unless, of course, you come up with a new way of replacing Microsoft. And the third thing about technology, which is really important compared to tradition, is that it's not permanent. The amazing thing about technology, how it's always changing. You're familiar, the founder of Intel, whose name escapes me at the moment, but at any rate, this famous law that computer power is going to double every year. So the thing about technology, and again, it's a strength, it's not a weakness, but it's just always changing. And you can come up with the greatest thing. And of course, within a couple of days, it can be totally obsolete. So technology is isolating. It's not particularly spiritual, and it's not permanent. So let's look for a moment at the alternative, which I've called tradition. Why is tradition important in our lives? Well, the first thing is that tradition binds us to other people. We have shared traditions, not in Judaism, in any religion, in any ethnic group. And tradition, and this is really important for you guys, it creates a sense of community. It's one of the things around which community is based, that we have a shared tradition. A second thing about tradition is that tradition is primarily spiritual. It comes from the heart. And I spoke to Rabbi Katzin earlier, and he said something very nice. He said, you know, the very first thing we do at the Seder is we break the matzah, And we basically are saying, let all who are hungry come and eat. And he pointed out how a lot of you are involved with food distribution. Some of you, I think, at the Leader Family Food Pantry, which I founded. So this is something that's spiritual. It comes from the heart. You're doing it as an act of chesed because it makes you feel good. And the third thing, which is very, very important, especially in Judaism, but probably in any religion, is that tradition embodies a historical chain. It ties us to those who came before us and to those who are going to come after us. And two of the interesting concepts about Pesach that interest me, and I'm sort of on the spot here because we have Rabbi Goldstein, and he might say, Jonathan, you're a nice guy, but you're wrong, or Rabbi Haran might say the same thing. But you know, there's a wonderful tradition that all Jews from all time were rescued from Egypt. And there's also a wonderful tradition that all Jews from all time were present at Mount Sinai when Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the Torah. So what tradition does is it embodies a historical chain. It relates what came before us to what became after us. Now, finally, let me turn to Pesach. For many Jews, and I think especially for so-called Russian Jews, Pesach is probably the most important holiday of the year. And I'm not saying Yizkor and Yom Kippur is not important. It is, but I think as a celebration, Pesach is the most important. And there's an obvious reason that for, if not you, but for your parents, for your grandparents, there's a very logical comparison between the exodus of Jews from Egypt and the exodus of Jews from Russia. And I spoke to Rabbi Kitzin this morning. I'm reading, just as an aside, a very, very interesting book about World War II. And a lot of Jews in Poland, primarily, where there's a very large Jewish population, they were confronted with a choice. They knew about Nazism, they knew about Hitler. It was before the death camps, but they knew Hitler was certainly no friend. And they had a choice of basically staying in the parts of Poland that were dominated by Hitler and taking their chances, or going to Russia. What had happened was Russia, just a tiny bit of history, they were given Lithuania, parts of Ukraine, the Baltic countries. So the Jews in Poland, of which there were 3 million, they had to make this horrible choice. And interestingly, a lot of them stayed in place. Despite their knowing what might happen. And why didn't they run to Russia? Well, especially among the Orthodox Jews, of whom there were many, they knew that Russia was an atheistic place. And they were afraid that they would not be able to practice their Judaism in Russia. So they felt the greater risk was going to a place where they could not practice their Judaism. And of course, we know by staying what happened to them. Ironically, those who did go to Russia, which you may or may not know this history, but they were basically deported by Stalin, who did not trust them, to Siberia. They spent the war in Siberia. It was terrible. It was freezing cold. There were bugs as big as mice. There were all kinds of disease. But nonetheless, unlike the Jews who stayed in Poland, they survived. And by the way, after about a year, Stalin gave them an amnesty. He said they could leave. Most of them did. They initially went to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and then some of them went on to Israel. But at any rate, the point I'm trying to make here with that slight digression is that Russian Jews especially feel a strong link to Pesach, because both are stories of freedom, both are stories of liberation. Now, where you guys come in is that, as we saw from the show of hands, Pesach is celebrated by some, but it's not celebrated by others. Russian Jews came here, some became quickly assimilated, some were not that interested in Judaism. but I'm really making a request. I'm here to make a request. And the request that I'm making is that you guys plan and carry out a Seder for your families. That this is a tradition that must not die. That at least once a year, if not more, your families, and you're all part of Rage. I mean, I'm not talking here to a group of people for whom Judaism is not important. By definition, you're on this call, so you care. But if you don't make the effort, if you don't do the work, then in many cases there might not be a Seder. So, here are just some of the basic things you might think about of doing at the Seder. I understand that that few of you are what we would call Orthodox, but here would be some things that might be nice. Of course, if someone, and it doesn't matter, it can be in any language, and I know you have access, if your grandparents need it, to books that are in both Hebrew and Haggadahs that are in both Hebrew and English. But certainly the 4 questions. It's really traditional. As you know, the youngest person at the table is supposed to read it. But
No, it's fine.
I think that perhaps if you included the 4 questions. Another thing which I think is interesting to people at the table, some might know them, some might not, but the 10 plagues, It's very vivid, it's very visual. There's a little tradition which some of you guys may know or may not follow, is that after each plague, you take your hand, you dip it in a cup of wine, and you put it on a napkin or you put it on a tablecloth. And you could lead. You guys, you're grown-ups. You could lead a little discussion of, well, this 10th plague was pretty drastic. It was pretty terrible. The firstborn of the Pharaoh were going to be killed. So why did it come to that? And so you can talk about the stubbornness of Pharaoh and how Pharaoh did not heed God's warnings. And then, of course, talking about the Exodus. So you can pick and choose. You guys, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with the service. We spent Pesach some years ago with some black hat friends, very religious friends, and the Seder went on until 4 a.m. and no one knew his name. So I'm not suggesting that. It doesn't have to be a marathon. As a matter of fact, if it's an hour long, it's probably nice before the food is served. But the important thing is to do it and do it nicely. So in terms of doing it nicely, certainly you want to have matzah. If you're able to arrange it and it's not so difficult, it's very nice to have the Seder plate. And you might point out the significance of the various items on the Seder plate. But you all know, or you're all familiar with, and I'm coming to the very end here, that we have this wonderful expression in Judaism. And by the way, if there's time afterwards, either Rabbi Goldstein or Rabbi Haran, please feel free. But what is the very, very most important thing in Judaism is Lador Vador, which, as you know, means from generation to generation. And the very, pardon me, the very unhappy fact about Lador Vador is that 40% of American Jews don't care about Judaism, and they don't care about Israel. They've become totally assimilated, and Judaism and Israel are they're not on their agenda. Now, we can't afford this. If Judaism is going to survive, we have to have people who care about being Jewish. And one of the really important ways of carrying out Judaism, of Lador Vador, is by maintaining the traditions. So this is all said from the bottom of my heart. My wife, Dina, who some of you might met, actually was born in Ukraine. She came to the United States. She is as committed, she's not here at the moment, she's as committed to all of this as I am. But I'm just asking you, not for my sake so much, but for your sake, for the sake of your family, for the sake of tradition, for the sake of Judaism. If no one else is going to do it, or if other people in your family are going to do it, be involved, put on a nice Seder. And when we come back in a month or 6 weeks or whatever it is and have another discussion, you'll be able to tell us how great it was. So I thank you very, very much. I really thank you for listening. And it's a mitzvah. It's a good deed, and it's important. And if we want Judaism to live and to thrive and survive, we can't sit idly by. So have a wonderful Pesach, a Chag Sameach. I wish I could be at the table with all of you. And please try and have a wonderful Seder evening. So Rabbi Goldstein, I thank you very, very much. And please carry on with the rest of your program.
Thank you very much, Mr. and Mrs. Leader. Guys, give him a hand. Thank you so much for a wonderful Pesach message. We really appreciate it.